Hello, and welcome to Real Actors, Real Answers, the podcast where you are the star. Today, I have the amazing privilege of interviewing Sebastian MacLean. He is, where do I start? He is an actor. He is a writer. He is, I'm just going to let him, I don't want to steal his fire. So I'm going to talk to him, and you're going to listen, and you're going to be amazed and learn something. Sebastian, hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Where are you from again?
Well, I'm from the GTA, as they call it, or near the Toronto area. I was born here, moved to the east coast of Canada when I was about 5, and I lived out there for probably 30 years or so, and that now I've moved back to the Toronto area because there's just a more concentrated amount of work to kind of deal with from this location in terms of the film and entertainment industry in Canada. So this is where I'm based out of now.
Okay, so Toronto is hopping with opportunities, sounds like.
Yeah, it's one. I guess they call it one of the hubs in North America. There's New York, LA, of course. I think Toronto kind of ranks probably right around number 2 or 3. Sometimes it flips back and forth between New York and Toronto, and then Vancouver as well, just north of Los Angeles. That would be another area that is often quite competitive up here. Almost as much at times can be Montreal, maybe not quite as much. It's usually a close second or third up here. But yeah, these are the hubs of the business.
Excellent. I love that. You just taught me something brand new. Now my focus is going to go to Toronto as well. So you're an actor, and how did this all start?
Well, quite gradually on one level. I mean, my mother was in professional ballet when I was growing up. It was actually prior to my time, but she brought that influence, of course, into my life, the theater, performing arts that way. I didn't identify with it as much as a youngster initially because my mother just kind of came out of a whole other world. She was from England and had moved here in her 30s and married my dad. So it took me a while to kind of put the pieces together. My dad was a very physical guy, ran ski schools, worked in the woods a lot, and was a performer when it came to a lot of acts on the water, a little bit of stage stuff. So as a youngster, I was working out, trying to be athletic like my dad, things like that, and I graduated into bodybuilding, but my mother started to kind of help me with posing routines when I was 15, 16, as I was getting into that sport back in the very early 90s or late 80s. And so I started kind of dipping my toes into the acting world, probably more in high school and through film cooperatives out on the East Coast. And then, there were movies of the week that were coming out. And I started realizing a lot of what I was tapping into on the performing side was coming from things that I had learned from my mother about the classics, about expression on stage, things like that. So these two separate worlds, in a way, kind of came together gradually. And I just kind of continued as I did about 10 years of competitive bodybuilding through the 90s. And I was really doing it to build a character because as I was growing up, I was watching a lot of these guys like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Stallone, and kind of seeing how you could kind of recraft your physical condition to embody a kind of character of heroism or what have you. And then that got me into writing, wanting to write stories about internal strength. What does that mean? Integrity, bravery, courage. Those started becoming stories I wanted to tell and not just act in. So all of these things kind of connected together gradually over time, and that kind of brought me into where I am today, playing a little bit of both of those, acting the characters on screen and pitching scripts and talking to producers at the same time about ideas that, you want to have homegrown, if you will.
I heard everything you said. I acknowledge everything you said, but one thing that you said that reminded me of something, 10 years of bodybuilding. I am reading Total Recall, which is a biography or autobiography, I guess, of Arnold Schwarzenegger. Okay, I'm almost through with it. It's about 600 pages, but it's a page turner. Okay, so I'm thinking you could probably very easily, because everybody can write a book, You could write a book about your, I'm going to call adventures in your life that you've had, you know, bodybuilder. And you mentioned Arnold, so I'm going to mention him back. He's still alive. He's been bodybuilder, of course, actor, of course, real estate, big on real estate, and just diversifying his talents. He was in the military service too. Just so many things. And you kind of remind me of that picture. You're writing too, aren't you?
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for the compliment. I mean, Schwarzenegger has done an incredible amount and has certainly been a big inspiration for me. I think one of the things that I've had to try and figure out, and we all do when we, kind of pick an icon that we're kind of modeling some part of ourselves after, is what about them is like us and what isn't. So because I certainly saw a lot of that kind of in the moving through the bodybuilding stuff and acting, and that always inspired me. And then I guess the other thing is that I started kind of getting my own perspective on, and I am actually writing something about this now, which is interesting. You bring it up. I'm working on. I don't know if I call it the same kind of book as Total Recall, the book you're reading Schwarzenegger has written now. Not so much an autobiography, but more a process that I started seeing as a pattern in my own life that I thought might be helpful to others as well, which was, how you alchemize struggle in your life, and because one of the things that I learned by having to hitchhike to the gym, for example, and kind of get into a place where there was somewhere to work out, because I lived out in the country and it was like 35 kilometers away from any town or major town or city. So I started doing that very young, just to get workouts in and to figure out ways to get extra food, because my parents always provided it, but I was eating so much to try and gain the size that I needed for competition that I was bringing in a lot of extras. So figuring these things out, they were struggles, but they were struggles that kind of propel you to ask the question, well, what do I do about this? And what does this mean? Or if I want to act and I'm not in the hub of the business, how do I find a way to kind of get into the business anyway, or take that passion, that desire, or the pain you feel by not having access to what you feel you need or you want? What does it compel you to do? Because sometimes people stick their heads in the sand, or they throw their hands up in the air. But I've kind of come to a place where I've started to see that the alchemy of doing something with the struggle is what kind of produces often an unexpected and very dramatic result. It isn't necessarily going to be like what someone else does, kind of like what I realized with Schwarzenegger's story. When I was really young, I thought, oh, wouldn't it be great to copy that? And for a while you do, but then you hit struggles, you hit speed bumps, you hit things that are part of your story, and you start to realize yours is going to be different, because you're going to alchemize that differently than the person that maybe inspired you initially. And then maybe you start taking a page out of a totally different person's book, who's going to have been through a different set of circumstances. And so I started doing that, looking for other examples, people moving in different directions. So yeah, so I'm kind of trying to work that out, because there are processes that I engaged in, from goal setting to meditating on how you kind of even reflect on creating a vision for yourself. All of that is just sort of stuff I'm kind of feeding into this writing work right now.
Amazing. You use the word alchemize and alchemy. Could you give us a definition of that?
Well, of course, alchemy was the practice of attempting to chemically in some way convert lead into gold. So it's really a metaphor for how you take something that is rough, not what you want it to be exactly, and you work with it rather than throwing it away, and turn it into something of value. So that's what I would call alchemy.
Thank you for that accurate definition. Led into gold, hoping. But this takes patience and stepping back like a director and saying, what does this mean to me? Yes, you're going to feel frustration. Of course, you're a human being. But what are you going to do? Are you going to, like you said, stick your head in the sand? Oh, I give up. Well, then if you give up, nothing's going to happen. Well, a lot of nothing's going to happen to you. So this is a Pilgrim's Progress type of thing. You're walking it out. I love what you said. That's impressive. Hitchhiking to the gym.
Well, I lived about 35 kilometers from the nearest city, Fredericton would be a city, but it's more, by many standards, a town. There's about 40 to 60,000 people in the city of Fredericton, beautiful city.
Right.
But I lived out in the boonies. I lived in a farmhouse with a row of trees on one side and just open fields on the other. It was, I guess, an apple grove on one side. And I started out working out in my basement. My dad got me 500 pounds of plaster weights, those old ones. And, they were amazing. It was amazing to have that much, because most people would have, 70 or 80 pounds. I had 500 pounds of it. So that did a lot from about age 11 to 15 to get me going. But then when I started thinking about competing around 14, 15, I started trying to figure out how to connect to the gym. But my dad, who was, working and busy, he wasn't able to get me there. So I was lucky, on one level, that my parents were very open with, and things were different back in those days too, in the 80s. There wasn't as much there wasn't an internet, so there wasn't as much scary stuff to hear about. So, when I was probably around 13, I more regularly got out there on the road, and I would hitchhike down the road to my buddy's house. And I thought, well, that's a way to get around. So I started hitchhiking to the gym. And then I would take the bus in the morning to school when I got to high school, which was in a separate military town, and my gym wasn't there. So I go to high school, and then I'd hitchhike from the high school another 20 clicks to the gym. I'd work out at the gym. I worked out a deal with the owner to mop the floors after the gym would close. So I go do my homework at a Subway restaurant next door, go mop the floors when the gym closed, and then I get out on the highway and hitchhike 35 kilometers back to my parents' farmhouse. And I would do that with the kind of dream in my head of developing something. So I'd be standing under street lights at night in snowstorms or rain, and the harder it pounded, the question would enter my mind then, does this mean that I want it bad enough? Because if I'm willing to do this, it must mean that I really want this. And a lot of people, and I think a lot of people wouldn't do this, but I'm doing it, so that's got to mean something. So I would even try and interpret those challenges as a signal, if you will, that what I was doing was going to provide a result, because I was willing to take it maybe a little further than someone else might in those circumstances.
So much truth in there. You hear that, Generation Z?
Yeah.
If you want something, and if your computer goes down, or, I don't know, it's not fast enough, or the coffee shop is closed, or whatever, there's other things to do. I love your story. It's a story of you put forth the effort, and you keep going despite, and believe it or not, you're still alive. In fact, you've accomplished quite a bit, and that is almost like, it sounds to me like a part of your foundation that you built on over time, even as a young person. What was the toughest role? I'm jumping ahead a little bit. What was the toughest role that you ever have been, played?
Well, that is a really challenging question, because there are roles that are more involved, that are longer, let's say, and one could say, well, those are challenging because you're processing a lot more of a script while you're going through that, and so that can be challenging. But a lot of times those are, at least for someone in my camp, I tend to do little parts in big movies or big parts in smaller films, and that's sort of. What that means, though, is that when you're working on independent projects, you have a lot more flexibility when it comes to larger roles, because everyone's trying to kind of do the best they can with a limited budget, let's say. And if they have to do a script change, for example, like this would be an example of one of those challenges. I was working on an independent film about mixed martial arts, and playing a coach in that one. And a whole scene had to change. So I think it was like a whole, 3 pages 5 minutes before we were about to sit down and do the scene. And that was because they had to shoot a different setup the day before that changed the storyline leading into the scene I was in. So when I was handed that, they said, do you want to walk off for 10 minutes to try and get this sort of digested? Because it was all a back and forth dialogue. This wasn't one of those scenes where it's 3 pages, but there's only a couple lines on each page. This was just a full-on conversation for 3 pages. And in those situations, though, what we worked out was that the best thing to do was to, yes, read it through a couple times, but not worry about the kind of anxiety of kind of being off book, as we like to say, because it wasn't going to happen, not in a way where you really get relaxed into the lines and you're not even thinking about them anymore. So the best thing in that situation was that this was a director who knew what he was dealing with as well with in independent film. He's got to work with what he's thrown as well. And so he said, let's just do it page by page and we'll have a conversation together. And, if we get down to, half a page or, 2/3 of the page and we need to pause, we're going to be doing intercuts here anyway. So, you kind of creatively craft a way to make that conversation natural without blowing your brain cells, because you can't fix something in 5 minutes that, would otherwise take, some real time to kind of process. So those have been some, that's an example on the independent side. And I think also because you have the flexibility of a crew that knows they have to think on their feet. Every film is like that to some extent, but there's a lot of unique situations on those indie projects like that. When it comes to the bigger budget stuff, sometimes it's more about how you combine action with the dialogue in a lot of those cases, because there's some pretty elaborate situations where you might have a fight or a shootout kind of situation, but there's dialogue kind of moving into the scene at the halfway point. And if you're trying to kind of coordinate or choreograph the movement that happens with those things, it looks like real life in a way when you're watching it in the end, but when you're actually shooting it, there's a lot of kind of, don't step over this line. When you swing, you got to swing high or low, and you got to be in frame here and then say the line. So, trying to hit all those marks and all those beats in those situations, that can be a delicate process, because there's a lot of money maybe riding on making those scenes look sharp, because they're trying to get it right for visual effects or for editing or what have you. So that has a whole different kind of feel to it. It even feels a bit more wooden sometimes, but you're really proud of the result, because if you get it right, it looks really polished and really good. So that doesn't answer the question exactly, but there's just lots of little things like that, that I could probably tap into.
Right. No, you are learning on your feet. And
Absolutely.
There's no room for ego, which everybody has one, it's not a bad thing. It just gets in the way. Where did you study acting?
I didn't do the conventional route. I made some kind of inroads on it. I was selected down with a group that was auditioning for the National Theatre School, and there was also Sir George Brown's program, and they'd get like 800 people that would apply, and then they'd filter you down to a group of 30 or 15. National Theatre School was a bit tougher, and George Brown was sort of a close second. But before I even kind of went that route to attempt, and I didn't get into either program, mainly because National Theatre School was doing a kind of a nationwide search, and they would start on the East Coast and kind of go over to the West Coast. But by the time they got to the West Coast, I think a lot of their selections would kind of, the earlier groups on the East Coast would kind of fade in memory a bit. So I got a little closer in with Sir George Brown rather, and the sticking point in the conventional situations, and this goes back to part of why I'm writing, this process in this book, is that I came from a family that had very sort of, what would you say, fundamentalist Christian beliefs, and I've kind of departed. I'm still a believer in God, but I've kind of departed from a lot of the roots that I came from in terms of those particular beliefs. And not to pick on them or make that an issue in the conversation so much. It was just more that, remember in my dialogue, the professor wanted to know what I was reading, and I think the focus that my circle came from, it just didn't seem, it seemed like it might lock me in too much, and I needed to do some growing and kind of searching myself in terms of what it was that I was going to be about, because at the time I was trying to get into those programs. I was 20 years old, what have you. And so my school, if you will, was aside from doing plays in high school, and then when I finished that, I moved on to film cooperatives and a lot of workshops through film cooperatives, and I was doing the work there. But I think being in life and experiencing life kind of opened my mind a lot to the things that I needed to learn in order to become a better actor as well. So it was kind of a blending of doing the work, doing the workshops, of course, being things that might span a month or two at most, and then you kind of move off and live and do a small project here and there. Those kinds of things were that was the school that I kind of went through. It was, thankfully, I think, outside the conventional box, because I think it's what I needed in order to grow more, both as an individual but also as an actor.
You have your own gospel. I'm going to tell you why I said that. This was like years ago, but someone in my family passed away, and there was a sweet lady there, very intelligent but very compassionate too. She was from hospice. Okay. And so she was consoling everybody, but then we got into it, her and I, in a conversation. And she said, I don't know exactly how it happened, but she said, it sounds to me like you're writing your own gospel. And right away, my religious background, religion is dead. God is alive. But it's like, that's sacrilegious, I thought. No, it's not. You have, yes, the good news gospel, the Bible. But you know what? God gave you a unique ability of being you, and he knows all about you, but you have to find out about you. And so you develop yourself. It's free will is a gift, and you're developing yourself. And no, you didn't go the traditional route of, Juilliard or wherever, but you found your way. Okay. And clearly, jumping ahead a little bit, your acting reel is phenomenal. I've seen it many times. You're a really good actor. You're very focused, accurate. Every movement, there's a lot of physicality in it, but every movement is calculated as far as I can see. Now that didn't happen just the first take or second take, but because you're working with people, that have different viewpoints, literally different viewpoints, and the lighting and the sound and everything else. What's your typical day on a set, and when I say typical day, how long are you on a set? What's the longest you've ever been on a set for a day?
Oh, well, I mean, on a given day, I think, I've done, projects where you run into overtime and you've been there for maybe 17 hours for the day, and that's a long day. And maybe longer. I'm not 100% sure. I know I've run into some of those overtime runs. They don't like doing that because that costs a lot more money when that happens. And then, I think I've usually maxed out in terms of my time on projects, usually around 3 weeks. Certainly other actors have been on projects much longer. But even when I've done lead roles, in terms of the lead roles, they usually have wound up being on indie projects, like I said before, where the budget's fairly tight. So if they only have $500,000 to make a movie, if they have someone in a lead role, they want to try and get that film shot in 2 to 3 weeks just to stay on budget. So even if you're in every scene, like it's maybe 2-3 weeks is sort of the max. On big budget projects where they're shooting for 7, 8, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, or more, I've been on those for a couple of weeks at a time, doing something that's like a scene that lasts maybe 60 seconds because there's just so much CGI. Like when I was working on X-Men, I was an astronaut in that one, and that scene isn't very long. The X-Men are kind of coming up to rescue us. We're having problems in the shuttle, and but there was so much CGI involved in that we had to shoot, the X-Men thing and the shuttlecraft or the spacecraft, and then there's all that stuff going on in outer space you're reacting to, and you're floating in space. They got to scan your body so that they can use a 3D model of you, so that they can make all these things happen and make it look real. So that took 2 weeks, but it wasn't a lot of camera time, ultimately.
So you learn.
Yeah, always.
Yeah, definitely. It's never boring. The reason why I asked about the hours per day is because this is for just people to be aware. Yes, it's nice to receive an award or an Oscar or, something of your achievement. However, the backstory, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of sacrifice of time, your energy, your money, family at times, being away from them and things like that. It's fun, but you have to realize you're 13 years old hiking to the gym and hitchhiking to the gym, you're used to that now. You have memories to draw upon. Okay, this is a hitchhike. This is something that I need to do, and I understand it. You grow exponentially many times. You've also, I got to say this because I'm excited about it, and I've seen it on your acting reel, Reacher.
Oh, yes.
I love that show. It's he's so formidable, Is he a nice guy in real life?
Oh, Alan is, he's a great guy. We didn't get a chance to chat a lot because, I was there I did 3 different scenes, but I think he and I were working together just on one. But he was very gracious, because we were doing something that was sort of involved a kind of physical altercation where he kind of smacks me through a table or onto a table and knocks me out. He was always very concerned in between takes that that they weren't pushing things in a direction where I could get hurt, things like that. And we had a good little bit of dialogue too, just behind the scenes about how he's handling his training and staying in shape while moving to all these different locations and everything. And because I just really I understand, as someone who trains myself, how challenging it is when you don't have access to equipment on set or a nearby gym and you're shooting those hours. Trying to maintain that kind of physical conditioning is quite a task, and so he's done a great job of that. So we had a little bit of conversation about what his routine is like in backup situations where he just might have a couple of dumbbells in the trunk of a car and need to get out on the highway and do a quick jog or something like that. But he was just really good about doing those things and very generous to kind of share with me about what that process was. And we talked a little bit about our kids. Of course, he's just a very genuine and open character, which I really appreciated. And someone who speaks his, is willing to share and speak from his mind. I find sometimes in in any industry, but in the entertainment industry particularly, people are careful about what they say. And not to say that Alan isn't, but he just shares a lot from the heart, I think, about his views. Which whether or not we align on everything, it is sort of not the relevant point, because I just really admire when people have the courage to kind of, express themselves and share their thoughts and be open to, the engagement. And maybe not everyone agrees with you, and you can kind of go, oh, that's an interesting point of view. And he was that kind of guy. So I really, I really enjoyed working with Alan.
Nice. How did you get the audition?
It was just sort of a part of the routine that I get through the agent that I work with. My agent, Alex Kasman, is a fantastic agent, and so she just keeps her eyes open as projects are kind of coming up into the Toronto area, or as they're kind of casting is looking for people. I've been blessed to kind of be in the room with a lot of the different casting agencies and people in the city. So when a part comes up that it looks like I might be a good slot for, I'm lucky now because I'll get a casting director will call Alex and have me read for it. And maybe based on the fact that I've done other characters successfully in other shows that are kind of that evoke those kinds of character types, tough guys, soldiers, cops. I've done a lot of those kinds of characters, both from the good guy side and the bad guy side. And so this was kind of a nasty guy who was being a bit rude in that particular show. And I've played those rough characters before. So yeah, I got the call through casting, and my agent kind of asked me to put it on tape. I did, and then once they got the tape, there was some enthusiasm about what I had elected to put forward, because you always give your interpretation. And then the casting wanted to contact me and do a read on Zoom, mainly so that they could kind of direct me and give me some of their own flavor in terms of what they wanted to see me try and do, so that they could pass that along to the director. So that was sort of the process. I think we were talking before on another occasion, and I said when I did the Zoom, I thought it felt okay, but I felt better in my tape. But I got the part, and the reason I raise it is that a lot of times what the casting director is looking for isn't necessarily your initial take. It's good to provide it, but if they have those tweaks, and casting does a good job, which they do have done in this case, it was exactly what the director was looking for. So they saw that I had something. They saw if they just tweaked it a bit, they get it where it should be, and they pass it on the director, and the part kind of came my way that way. So yeah, it's an interesting evolutionary process.
Evolutionary process, yeah, absolutely. It's creative. It's
not. And then when you get on set, it's different again, because you're not going to deliver, or you don't want to get stuck delivering what you have in your head that the character has to be. You're going to have to adapt it to some extent if you're being open and really listening to the other performer to respond to them as well. So if they're kind of acting toward you in a certain way in the scene, you've got to throw some of that stuff that you came prepared for. You got to throw that out and be ready to respond in an authentic way in the moment as well. So, if the character's being a bit more sarcastic than you were expecting that opposing character to be, or if they're going to be more angry, maybe that's going to affect your performance as well. So you have to be always willing to make those changes and adaptations.
Do you believe in furthering education, because we all get rusty in anything we do? Do you still take classes once in a while, workshops, scene study, things like that?
Yeah, well, I the way I look at it, I think it's always good to always be honing your craft, and I guess life, I think sometimes we forget that life itself can help us hone our craft. It's not like you have to turn down opportunities to experience the world or what have you, because you've got to take a bunch of more acting classes over the next few years. I mean, sometimes, yes, we're in a program and we dedicate ourselves to that, but life itself is an incredible teacher for how we handle our performance. If you've experienced elation on the top of a mountain and you're doing a role, you can draw from that. If you've lost someone in your life, and you draw from that too. That pain and the joy and all of those things that come from a real lived experience is part of the teaching. But I think there are times as well, if there was a role, let's say, where there's something a bit more involved that you want to be prepared for, it's very valuable to contact a coach or contact someone that can work with you, whether it's on dialogue or dialect rather stuff, or whether it's just performance, getting into a new and different kind of headspace. Because one of the things I've noticed over the years with acting is that you can feel very far removed from certain, maybe even character types that you're often called to kind of audition for or be looked at for. Maybe it's a time, there are ups and downs in life. And if you're always playing the confident guy or what have you, but you're going through a bit of a tough time, you might feel like, I just don't know if I can sell that right now. But the truth is, as soon as you begin to plug in, whether it's with a coach or with a class or in life, you become what you need to become by being willing to step into it. If you're away from it, yeah, that's not you anymore. If you're going to stand back from it, but however you get there, whether that's through classes or whether that's through injecting yourself into a life experience that kind of brings you to that place. The question isn't can you, it's just are you willing to, and maybe it's okay if you're not, because maybe you that's not a direction you should go in at that time, but not everyone's destined to play a clown on TV, and some people are. Not everyone's destined to play a super confident tough guy or what have you, and some people, that's what they really want to kind of learn how to project. So we can learn just about anything. The question is, are you willing to kind of get past the fear and kind of engage in whatever lessons you need to kind of pull it out of yourself, whether that's through a class or through life.
Very true. Very true. You just touched on something that I've thought many times. I'm sure you have too, and most people have. You look back on a certain time, for instance, between 11 and 15, you were hitchhiking to, what was it, 35 kilometers to, in bad weather at times to work out, okay? And you look back, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, you look back and you go, how did I do that? How did I do that? But you just gave an answer. I'm so grateful. You push yourself into, and you actually kind of fit the mold after a while because you're making a conscious effort to create something new. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah. I think in a way that the fake it till you make it statement, it kind of sells you short a bit, because it's not even about faking it. It's just about putting yourself into the situation, and life begins to mold around you. You begin to take the shape of the thing that you're in. So it's real from the beginning. It's just not as easy at the start, but like anything, it's like building a callus. Your hands may not feel adapted to gripping the bar, but you can still do it. It's more uncomfortable in the beginning, but over time, your hands have adapted, formed the calluses that make it feel second nature to hold on in that way. So it's the same in life. If you want to do something, it might be uncomfortable initially, but if you make the decision, that discomfort will dissipate as you mold into the situation.
Nice. I love it. Listen, when's your book coming out? I've got to read it.
That's a good question. I had like 300 pages of notes, moving in like directions, multiple directions. I'm hoping that, over the next 3 months or so, I can get an initial draft. What it really was kind of intended for was more, I used to do, and still do, but every now and then one-on-one coaching for conditioning, weight loss, things like that. I've always kind of limited that, mainly because a lot of the stuff I've been working on has kind of, I wouldn't say moved on from it, but it's an outcropping of that. And I wanted to figure out a way to kind of bring more of that to the table. So what I was intending to do was just to provide for potential clients a way that they could see how you can engage in a process for the alchemy of struggle, as I call it, that will allow you to move past these, challenge points or sticking points in life or major turning points in life. And for some people, that is, needing to lose some weight. For some people, it's the fact that they've closed up, had to close up a relationship, a hard one, and they're starting from ground zero again. And how do you, plug in to what you need to kind of move forward? So that was the impetus for the idea. And I started kind of laying out the patterns that I'd gone through in my own life that kind of got me through some really crazy and wild situations that I realized, these are tools that may be helpful to other people. And so that expanded into my 300 pages of notes. And I was like, okay, I'll probably have to, create a book for this, and we'll kind of work through the steps together when I get people on board with it. So I'm going to say 3 months before there's something initially, and then maybe another 3 months of refinement before the book probably gets out the door.
How can people contact you? What's the best way for you?
Um, the easiest way is probably to reach me through my YouTube channel on the M2M project. I'm on a bit of a pause there right now, but just looking to regroup for future content. But there's lots of stuff there, and I of course respond to comments there. And also another way would be through Instagram. Sebastian.MacLean on Instagram. If you message me through there, I can be reached that way. And also, my email, I'll just put it out there, is info@sebastianmaclean.com. So that's also available as well.
Thank you for being on Real Actors, Real Answers. You, Sebastian, stay with me. But thank you for being on this show. You've really expanded my own knowledge base as well as inspired me. You have a great story. You have a great life story that's evolving over time. So thank you for being on Real Actors, Real Answers.
That was my pleasure, David. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.